Welcome to Female Frequency Podcast. Hi, everyone. I'm Jody Nelson, curator, artist, mentor, divine channel, and host of Female Frequency. I am here to bring you unbound forms of ecofeminism, reclaiming art, spirituality, and feminine power to revive the earth. Each week, Female Frequency brings you intimate conversations with trailblazers and amazing stories to ignite change. You'll find inspiring alternatives to the patriarchy, discover creative paths, courage, connection, and magic. Hear from the heroes who activate and restore the divine feminine for our earth. Each episode serves as a catalyst, offering wisdom along with practical steps to empower you to make a positive impact on the planet. Whether you're an artist, empath, or eco-warrior, there's a story here to invite awe and help you embody what I call the female frequency. Hello, everyone. As we continue our stellar lineup for Women's History Month, I am so excited to introduce you to my next guest. Jody Sperling connects human bodies and earth ecologies and movements that are so mesmerizing. You guys, you can't take your eyes off them. She works in the idiom of another female trailblazer named Loie Fuller, who is an American pioneer of dance, lighting, and theatrics. But back in 2014, Jody was part of a communication team on a polar science mission where she translated climate phenomena into haunting dances at the edge of the earth. So we're talking on the Arctic Ocean, to be precise. Today, Jody shares her artistic journey aboard the science research vessel and the origins of ecokinetics, in which human movement acts as conduits for environmental systems. We explore her drive to embody natural phenomena and the stories in their wake. You'll learn how her collaboration with ecoacoustics composer Matthew Bertner nurtured kinetic responses to deeper earth processes in her American elm and arbor work. As founder and artistic director of Time Lapse Dance, Jody and her all-female ensemble expand time-space for us to explore kinship with life forces within our more-than-human ecosystems.
Hello, sister. We have Jody Sperling with us. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Well, Jody, it's a pleasure always to speak to you, and also always another Jody.
I can't wait for us to have a Jody party, because you've had a couple friends named Jody too.
Yeah, it's funny. In the dance world, there's a few of us, and we sometimes get confused for each other. Yeah, my friend Jody Oberfelder is very sweet, because if somebody, sends her a message and is wanting a Loie Fuller dance, she'll be like, "Hey, I think you mean Jody Sperling." So, but we are a lot of fun.
Love it. We are a lot of fun. And I remember when I interviewed you last year sometime, I got to tell you, I was having technical difficulties getting my equipment set up, and the Venus of Willendorf was just speaking to me in the background. She wanted to be in our picture, and I just thought I'd share that with you, because it was a great conversation as we worked on that project Beyond an Inconvenient Truth together, and I was able to showcase your dance titled Ice Flow, Floe, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that, because we live in not only a world of Photoshop, we live in this AI world. And for those that can go to your site and see Ice Flow, you are on the ice dancing.
It's real.
It's
I know.
Real.
It's real. I find myself when I see AI pictures, or I get almost enraged, because I think about this way as artists that our work is always being taken from us and quoted with and sort of recontextualized without our consent. And then the fact of it being sort of regurgitated in these really easy to digest, like too pretty capsules, I do find, I'm a pretty chill person generally, but I get really aggravated because it erases, I think, what is the goal of my work, and I know a lot of artists are really trying to get at truth. Like, we're trying to uncover some aspect of reality that we didn't see before. And it becomes even more precious when, with the deepfake technology that we have now, it can become so easily erased and repurposed. And then also there's a kind of skepticism about what really happened. And I did this project, IceFlow. It was one of the outcomes of a project I did about 10 years ago, or I can't even believe it's been that long, but I was invited to participate in a polar science mission to the Chukchi Sea. That's the area that's sort of north of Alaska in this peripheral ice pack area. And I was basically an artist in residence, part of a climate science communication team, embedded with a very large group of scientists who were studying different facets of what's called the cryosphere, or this ice. And so some were studying the ocean physics, and some were studying the ocean, the marine biology and the zooplankton and the ice algae, and some were studying the, mathematical properties of sea ice, which turns out to be very interesting because it has these brine channels, and actually mathematically it's very similar to human bone. That is my favorite factoid. And so I went along with this party, and I was part of, this team, and they were kind of interested. Oh, what's your research about? And I was like, oh, well, my research is about trying to conjure or capture some element of this phenomena that we know as sea ice. And sea ice is so dynamic and cool. It's this floaty stuff, and it looks like land. And so in this film, you see me dancing on sea ice, and it spreads out in every direction. And almost anyone who sees this film might think, oh, she's on some snow on top of land, but I'm not. I'm on a thin crust of ice floating over an ocean, and that thin crust of ice in the region where I was, which was 10 years ago at that time, at the time of year that I was there, was about 1.2, 1.5 meters thick, or about my height, say. And, but, like 10, 20 years before that, it would have been 3 times as thick, and now, and now it's just this like thin, it's not even freezing sometimes in the winter because the oceans have warmed so much. So it's I often go online. I have the coordinates of where I've been, and I'll check, where I was performing. And I was there in May, so just kind of at the end of the May and June. So the ice is starting to melt, and we were sort of there, to try to capture the beginning of the melt season. But it wasn't the fullest extent, and I look, and definitely the areas where I was even then at the lowest extent would have been just open water, but now it's not even always refreezing. So it's a scary thing, and I'm really interested in this idea of trying to see trajectories, because I think we're so used to, as humans, like living in the moment, seeing things in the moment that we're in, that we can't sort of step back and look at the sort of bigger picture of what's happening over the course of time. And so, my dance company is called Time Lapse Dance, because I think that's just a great way of thinking about what movement could do, that movement could somehow create a time lapse, and also that we could sort of start to understand, like, what are the larger forces at play that propel us in different directions without us knowing.
Absolutely. So let's actually paint a bigger picture as people are listening. So with IceFlow, you are an artist that was invited to this climate science summit, or this climate science.
It was a mission. You call it a mission?
And
actually, the word that they like to use, that I like, is a cruise. But it's not like a luxury liner cruise. It's like it's a ship filled with scientists and a Coast Guard crew, and for the purpose of doing polar science research. And so it was pretty cool. I mean, my dad is a scientist and my brother's a scientist, and I went to a math science high school. So I just love being around scientists, because I think that artists and scientists actually have a lot in common. I would say that we're both people who care more for truth than for money. And that's like the baseline. And I also think that scientists really care about beauty too. They often have a sense of like a beautiful theory and they can sort of sense, like, the closer they get to understanding how things work, that presents a kind of has an aesthetic dimension. But also, especially scientists who are working in like Arctic conditions are used to improvising and, kind of making do and figuring things out on the fly as their equipment fails, but they still got to capture the data. And artists have to do the same all the time. Oh, that light's out. Let's, figure out what's happening here. And so I think, it was really inspiring to be around people who are so passionate, so resourceful, so determined, and, determined to continue telling the truth, even though, in the face of the obvious, there's still such a large, momentum behind obscuring reality.
Wow. That's a beautiful thing, to bring such different perspectives and point of views on the same cruise, in the same vessel, and being able to respond to what they're seeing and what's happening to the reality in very different ways. So you're saying someone was looking at the map, someone was looking at the data and analyzing this, and then you were responding kinetically. You were responding with your body, with the earth in those temperatures.
Yeah, and what was really cool is that I also was learning as much as I could about the science. So I could get, in the mess hall, I could get little free tutorials on different phenomena. And I got really interested in sea ice formation. And so I actually helped with some data collection, something called Ice Watch survey. So I would go up to the bridge, every day at the same time and do a kind of visual description of what I saw, like what percentage of the ice, of what I could see was covered with ice, how thick was that ice, what were the kinds of formations that I saw. And so I was sort of inspired by the topography there, in how, when I would get onto the ice, I would think about the forces that had created these big, what we would call pressure ridges, that are basically when two ice floes crack, which they do, and they separate, and then, turbulent winds knock them together, they create these big sort of rubble piles of ice. And young ice, first year ice, is just covered maybe, 20-30% in the region where I was, with these, big rubble piles of ice everywhere called pressure ridges. And so that was sort of an interesting idea to think about, it wasn't a storm at the time that I was there, but I was thinking, how could I express this turbulence in my own body, right? And then also, echo that what was happening in the landscape. I also was interested, one of the things about the Arctic is that you have gray sky, gray ice, and the most important feature in the visual dimension is the horizon. And that's just everything is this horizon. And so I really thought a lot about embodying that horizon, and sort of studying it and thinking about how I could almost camouflage my body in somewhere between the ice and the sky. And that became, and so my project for Ice Cycle wasn't for going on this mission. It wasn't just to dance on sea ice. That was kind of almost like a bonus because we didn't know if the Coast Guard would allow it before I went. We didn't even know if the conditions would allow it. And it turned out I was able to get on the ice a lot, like a dozen times in a 6-week mission. But so I made a film of me. I got a lot of chance to practice in the ice. But the other thing that I did was when I came back, I sort of gathered the material from my research of having been there and turned that into a theater piece called Ice Cycle, which explored the sort of, human, like, in kinetical reinterpretation of sea ice for the stage. And that was, really a formative piece for me in my creative development because it helped me kind of just get started on a journey, which I now call ecokinetics, which is this idea of connecting human movement with environmental systems and looking at ways to do that both on site, but also being able to transport, say, the syntax of an environment to the stage and sort of give the audience an experience of a place and of a kind of natural phenomena. And the piece put me into, it started off the collaboration that I've had for the last 10 years with composer Matthew Bertner. And that has also pushed me to kind of conceptualize the work that I'm doing differently. But Matthew grew up in the far north of Alaska, surrounded by a lot of ice and snow. And he's kind of a specialist in making music that uses ice and snow in his compositions. And also, kind of relates to climate change. And so when I was looking for somebody to work with, I came across his site. It was like, oh my God, I have to work with Matthew. And he was very excited to work with me on this project. And so over the past decade, we've done a number of projects. So we started with Ice Cycle, which we both sort of thought about what are the phases of the ice, can we represent its formation and dissolution, both in a way that sort of respects the beauty and looks at it as a kind of being on its own that has like value apart from being a platform that polar bears, need. It's just
right.
Like it's this interesting thing, right? And then, also looking, and then how can we make that sort of disappearance, like hit home for people? Because, especially 10 years ago, people weren't talking about climate change as much, and the changes were happening in the Arctic, but not that many people live there. So our first program was called Bringing the Arctic Home, actually, because it was like, as a New Yorker, we could do this program that was about sea ice, that a lot of people would never see. And, it was like helping share it with them before it's gone.
Right.
And so that was, anyway, it was great because that had initiated this like 10-year collaboration. And so, it is, I know we started off talking about it, but I would say what has happened was that Matthew is a pioneer in this field of music composition called ecoacoustics, which derives it's kind of a method of music composition that starts with environmental input. And so it might be listening to the environment, it might be playing the environment, and then basically creating music from that information or from those sounds and structuring it so that you learn something about the environment. And it could be the life forms, it could be the geology, it could be the flora. And so, and so we start, so that just, anyway, but that whole idea of like ecoacoustics, like inspired me to try to think about what would be the dance equivalent. And I just, came up with the idea of ecokinetics. And that is I can go back and sort of retroactively say what I was doing in the Arctic was ecokinetics. But I've been consciously thinking over the last few years about crafting a kind of ecokinetics practice, in the works that we're, creating now.
What a rebalancing of self with the earth. I mean, I've always said that the story is in ice, because as you can listen to the data, and especially in Al Gore's inconvenient truth statistics that were already surpassed now that it's 2023, 24, I mean, the ice can tell us so much. So it struck me when you were saying on young ice, the ice does have a life.
Yes. And it's not, there's like young ice and then there's older ice, and that older ice is like, I didn't encounter very much of it, but it's called multi-year ice. And it's so cool because it's thicker and it's harder, and it's like, we can anthropomorphize it and think it's wiser, but it is like more valuable to the ecosystem in a way, right? Like it provides density, and stability to the environment that the young ice doesn't have because it gets knocked around more. Anyway, it is just thinking about, I thought my thinking has shifted because, that like ice cycle was, about this geological process, and the piece that Matthew and I have just premiered, in November, is called Arbor, and it relates to trees. And I think that for me, this was the first project that I just started right from the beginning, trying to conceptualize it as an ecokinetics project. And for me, I, went into a deep dive, reading about trees. And I think we all, in the last few years have been, obsessed with trees. I know a lot of people who are tree people, but, this is really cool thing that, now people understand, like trees communicate with one another, that their root systems, connect, and that there's this thing called mycorrhizal fungi that helps the trees, share nutrients and send messages to each other, and it's it supports their growth. And we know that older trees can basically nurture younger trees, even if they don't have the even if they're in a shady spot. A mother tree might give a young one of its offspring some nutrients to keep growing, even though it's in the shade, it doesn't have sunlight. So we start to think there's two things that are really interesting for me as a choreography idea on this. One is you can't draw the edge around one organism. We might think like a tree is a single entity, right? But the tree is composed of, it relies on the mycorrhizal fungi. There's algae, bacteria that are essential for its survival, right? And it's just, so one tree is like a collaboration of species. And the same is true for people, right? One human, right? Like we have trillions of cells, and we have all this microbiome, right? Like it's so many different species collaborating to support our digestion and our health, and so we have to stop thinking of ourselves as singular and start thinking about ourselves as in the royal we sense, right? Like we, me, my trillion cells in my gut microbiome think, blah, blah, blah. And I think that idea of individuality is one of the key drivers of everything that's wrong about the world right now, and also the key force behind climate change, because we think about our a single individual's well-being and not the well-being of everyone. So there's two things. So first, there's this idea that each individual is not one, but multiple. And then the next layer is that we understand that trees, form societies, right? So multiple trees they're like a superorganism, right? And the same with people. Like if we thought of communities as like almost like an organism, right?
And how they can nurture one another.
Yeah. So it's like we're both like each one of us as an individual is composed of many species, and it's a collaboration. And each one of us individually is part of a larger organism or community, however we want to define it, that has, and that we have this kind of possibility for group or diffuse consciousness, right? And I think it's just a really interesting and important idea for us all to try to inhabit. You might think of it as like, and that's what I started with this dance, or this, how can dance help us, inhabit this idea? How can we sort of model interconnectedness? How can we model interspecies collaboration? And how can we show how people are like trees and trees are like people, And so that's really what the piece is going for. I feel like I should explain, I have a particular kind of style of working that has a historical precedent. And so your listeners may not, if they're not familiar or haven't seen my work, it does rely a lot on costuming. And the kind of
absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt you, but yes, it is when I was watching it, I just felt like such a connection because it's, I don't want to say it's easy to watch because it's very complex in the emotions that was happening inside of me. But I think it's because of some line work that you're doing and keeping it a little more simple. And you were inspired from another woman from the 20s. Isn't that right? Loie Fuller?
Yeah. So I will just tell you that Loie Fuller was one of the most important performing artists, male or female, from the 1890s to the 1920s. And she really is considered one of the mother of modern dance. She innovated in the field of lighting design, and she was very instrumental in also and influential in the development of cinema. And she was represented by so many different artists. So we could talk about Loie Fuller all day long. And but I will just say
next time we will.
So what's very cool about Loie Fuller is she used these big costumes that were made from sometimes hundreds of yards of silk, and she put extensions inside the costumes. So they were like enormous ponchos with sticks in them. And so she could swirl and, swoop and spin and unfurl and
love that word.
Canopy. Yeah. All these costumes to create these enormous three-dimensional sculptural forms. And then she wasn't just satisfied with doing that, but she became a pioneer of lighting design and projection as she would illuminate these forms with brilliant and kaleidoscopic, lights and imagery. And so she was really doing this amazing technological, multimedia pyrotechnics, before we really think of it as being a kind of technological age. So, hats off to Loie. I got very inspired by her, and what I started doing about 20 years ago, actually, 25 years ago or more, was I had just a happenstance encounter with the form and trying on one of these enormous costumes. And as a woman, it makes you understand how powerful you can be when you fill up so much space. And so it's this great thing.
Can you say that again? When you fill up and you occupy so much space?
Yeah, because, as a woman, you're like, it's like a typical thing, like the woman on the subway has her knees together and the man, it's like called man spreading here in New York, where they like have their knees apart, right? And they take up more space on the subway seat. Yes. Right. Yes. And so as a woman, we're taught to occupy a little less space. So when you put on a Loie Fuller style costume and you have sticks inside it and you literally, your wingspan is 14 feet, you know?
Yes.
You start to really feel this elemental power. And it transcends gender and it transcends humanity because, and this is why I like it for the eco-kinetics, because this large costuming abstracts and amplifies the human movement. So the motion is not like a person moving their arm. The motion all of a sudden seems like a gust of wind or, you know, a leaf growing or, you know, the whirling of planets. So it's just a way of this apparatus, I call it, you know, even beyond costuming, this Loie Fuller style expansive costuming helps me understand my relationship to my immediate environment as a kind of mover, because I understand I have these like impacts. Like it makes sometimes like, this is like another way to think about it. It's like when you move through space, you're displacing air and you have a wake that is behind you and you can't see it, right? But if you have this enormous costume on, right, it visualizes all those impacts that you're already creating, right, that you can't see. And it helps you understand your move. It's almost like it helps you understand like the shape and the like negative dimension of your movement, like if you weren't there. And it's like ghostly that way. And that's why I continue after 25 years to be interested in using this apparatus to understand how are people and, you know, the world around them connected. And how can, you know, we kind of, as human movers, you know, create these elemental forces? So.
What a vibe to be in. What a frequency of just feeling like you are in your own power, like sovereign within yourselves, but being able to feel more connected with this elemental power. That is beautiful. I want to try on one of these costumes.
Yeah, you know, it is very powerful. I've had a chance to work with students. And I love it because especially with young people who, you know, often are just still discovering who they are and they're a little unsure about, you know, maybe hesitant to sort of, to make that, you know, action. I feel
Absolutely.
like it can be so powerful for them. And so I really do love to let people try and teach them like some of the joy of and experience this larger kinesphere.
Absolutely. So how are you doing workshops soon with
so I have
eco-kinetics?
Typically I work in, you know, college and university settings. So, you know, as an example, this winter, spring, I have a residency at University of Illinois, and I'll be there for a week. I'll be teaching, but also we're kind of exploring Loie Fuller and VR, which I'm pretty excited about. And I'll be talking about the way that about the natural and the technological, and how those two sometimes intertwine. And then we have another residency at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And I'll also have a chance to be giving workshops both within the dance department and to some student groups who are environmentalists. And, you know, we'll definitely be bringing this tree work, which I'm excited about.
I love it. I mean, this is such a neat vocabulary to be talking about. Eco-kinetics, eco-acoustics. I mean, you're really special, and I just love celebrating you.
I'm like inserting the little blush emoji right here. I appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you.
I don't even know how to ask. I love talking to artists about their creative process, and I feel like you have been dropping nuggets of your creative process through our time together. But is there sometimes I just get some of my ideas because I start moving my body. Like I start tying my shoes and I'm like, there's my download I needed. Thank you. Thank you. So is there something else about your creative process that you can share with us?
Well, it's funny, the longer it starts with me writing a grant. I'm going to just say that because I think to be
awesome. That's good.
Let's be real here.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that the grant proposal, maybe, I don't tend to get things done ahead of time because, life is pretty chaotic and busy. And so then you're like, oh my God, I got to come up with an idea, right? And then you come up with an idea. You realize you've had this idea and it's been sitting there and you're like, okay, I'm going to you're forced to write it out. So then I'll start with this concept, right? And then I start to explore, okay, how am I going to, and since I have this really deep collaboration with Matthew, we'll kind of, like zoom it out and thinking like, how's this going to work? And what are some, like with this tree piece, like, well, what are some different ways we could think about trees? And then, then it starts with a costume, right? And then I'm like, okay, let's go ahead and get a costume made, right? And so we had the first prototype costume made, and that took, like gazillions of hours of Zooms and, conversations and thinking about, and a whole month for the textile artist to paint. Just incredible work that she did just for this one, like the prototype, just to paint it was a full month, full time for her. And that was after it was, constructed. And so then we had that, and then I made a solo in it. And the solo took different forms. It took me doing it on the street and as a processional, thinking about being a tree growing through the asphalt on Amsterdam Avenue. And then it went into the theater where it became a kind of more of a, stage thing. And then then it multiplied. That grant came through and we ended up turning it into a piece for the 6 company members. But this all took 2 years, So one idea, like this tree idea, but it doesn't always just have one outcome, right? Like we had this, processional thing happening. We had this solo, which can still, exist on its own. We have now this sextet, and that, even that piece can be mutable a bit, if somebody gets COVID and we have to reshuffle who does what parts,
Right.
But, it's, I don't know. What I've realized is that these, pieces just take, it's not, I don't want to say that I worked more quickly, but I would sort of work project to project. And now I'm just thinking that the company has like a more coherent, unified vision maybe than we did 25 years ago. And it's really like the longer arc of these projects is possible because to really fulfill the idea, it takes so much time and revision and workshopping and, kind of back to the drawing board. And then the final thing, you may see it and all the layers of complexity may have been stripped away. And so it may just be fairly, like there are parts of artwork. Sometimes I look at it and I'm like, it seems simple, but it's not simplistic, right? Like it got to that elegant place, just like through so much, collaboration.
The elegant place. The elegant place through some of these female principles like collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, we also, it is collaborative with the performers, and I do have an ensemble that I work with, and they do contribute, like just as an example, like one of the processes I, will use is I'll have an idea for, we'll improvise around the idea. I'll video it. I'll take the screenshots of things that I feel really work. And then we'll maybe the next day we'll connect those dots and see if we can't kind of create, just like we basically have picked the best moments, and gotten rid of all of the exploration in between those great moments. So but even doing that, it's very painstaking. And I have dramaturgs that I work with. So I sometimes say, even if you see one person on stage and it looks like a solo, it's a whole village that allowed that to happen. Because it was like, there's the performer, but then there was all the, like, if the one person is performing it, everybody learned that part, and then there's me and the rehearsal director, and then everybody, maybe other people contributed to that movement. Then there's the costume, component of it, and then the lighting designer, and then the stage manager, and the wardrobe person. So it's like, and then that's not, counting on the whole administrative side, the board and the, and all the people who volunteered. So it's the, dozens and dozens of people that like make this very esoteric thing happen. And what's so beautiful is the value that people place on it's precarious and precious and fleeting, but the commitment and the value that everyone involved with the work places on it, like, it just makes you understand how the possibilities for transcendence in the live from, going back to this idea of like, we live in such a mediated age, and almost everything we experience, like via like social or through a screen or, like some repurposed AI version of what we did, right? And so like, just to allow a moment to be real and slow, and unfold.
And experienced.
And also not be perfect, like just let it be imperfect and let everybody have like their different bodies, Yes. I think it's so real. Like I think I've just been more attuned to trying to create like real moments more than perfect moments,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is, your lifetime of learning. Have you always lived and worked in New York, or?
I have. I grew up now. I pretty much have always lived in New York. I grew up in the city, and I lived downtown because my parents were professors and they lived in the NYU housing. And then, now I live uptown. And I'm just very much a New Yorker, and a lot of my work, we've been, especially starting before the pandemic, but it's really a lot during COVID and since, we've been performing outside as well as on stage. Yeah. And I really enjoy the opportunity to create community that you get when you perform on the street, and to have these happenstance, just to encounters with audiences who may not have, bought a ticket to see your show. Right. I just love so a big part of what we do is actually street activations. And I'm also involved actively there's a lot of advocacy in cities, and in New York in particular, around trying to transform streets into more sustainable public space. And right now, most of, like, a big chunk of curb real estate is basically, and I like to say, unceded land, right? It's unceded land that is actually public land, but it's basically allowed for free. It's given over to people to store their fossil fuel emitting vehicles, at no cost. And basically, you think about you just think parking, you just take it for granted. Oh yeah, of course you can just leave your car on the street, right? But why? Right. Like, why is that okay? And once you start to think about like what a subsidy the city is giving, to car owners to just let them like store their vehicles on the street. Like, I mean, I don't have a lot of space in my apartment. I would love to put, have a closet on the street, but I can't do that.
I love how you were questioning why. I love it. I love it. But your street activation things, I've watched those on your channel, and we're going to tell people where to go watch them too. But it just brought me back to two things. It brought back that movie American Beauty, where they just filmed the plastic bag floating in the wind and being picked up and brought up higher in the sky, and then it coming down and almost touching the ground, but then it would go and lift back up again. Your street activations are like a combination of these bags, like multiples, but also then what you can't see is the wind, because the way in which you and your company, your dancers are moving, like it's almost like a sea anemone or something, like crawling, or it is a trip, and it definitely invoked something and made me go, what? Just more and more questioning that I can't wait for others to go and watch.
So during the pandemic, we started working with plastic bags instead of silk. And it was it was this idea that it was just, one of the things we wanted to explore was plastic pollution, which is, of course, like, a dilemma for the ages. And what's so interesting is how, these plastic bags, which are, were single-use items, right, that they are so beautiful, like in this bizarre way. And everybody's always a little troubled by how fun and gorgeous they are, but what they do is they just completely transform, and they create this continually morphing imagery. So the performers, they wear costumes that have hundreds of these bags, and they're bags that were collected. They were not, it's not like we went out and bought the bags, like,
thank you.
Yes. Yeah, they were collected in a very, ethical way. And they're each a little different. So, one's like a little bit more of a green, brown bags, and one is a little all thank you bags, and one is, kind of a lot of the black and white wine bags. And so they have this like individual character. And so they feel like a herd of, a species that could be indigenous to like West 103rd Street,
Absolutely.
And so I think it's this idea that you could have these things that you throw away. It's like, you throw some plastic bags, you throw some plastic bags, and then they just like start to like grow. And then all of a sudden they become like a creature. And when the dancers are just like slumped over, they just look like a pile of garbage. They don't look like anything. And then they start to move, and it's like this pile of garbage comes to life. So I think that it also brings up that we're used to kind of, seeing people like in corners amidst piles of garbage, and we just walk right by. We don't even think that there's a human in there. And so it evokes, both this sort of sense of like, what are we throwing away? But then also like, who are we throwing away? And I think they're connected. I think how like society has been treating, people like they're disposable. And so the dances it's very playful and it's fun, but I think that it's a little deceptive in its sort of like entertainment value for the provocations. So I do hope that, it sort of creates a spectacle which gets that person walking down the street to watch it, but then it also gets people thinking about their trash and their plastic footprint, and then like what happens to it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. How about an existential question that people can ask themselves so then they can take action?
Yeah. So
ultimately, we want people to be more aware and more in relationship to what we all are doing here on planet Earth. And dehumanizing is so barbaric.
It's the cause of atrocity. When you when you say, when you say another person or another group of people is, an animal or is garbage, it is giving yourself permission to commit an atrocity. And we live in a world where this is happening, and it's so alarming and disturbing and upsetting. And so in our teeny tiny small way, we just try to create peace with the work that we do, peace between ourselves as humans and other humans and the planet and the other beings on this planet. So that's what we try to do. We understand it's like you can only, it's like we understand our influence is, not as at the scale that, right. But I do feel like it's nonetheless, it's super meaningful because I think
it's super meaningful because it's one person at a time, and then we can each share with our communities and they share with their communities, and we can keep this frequency going for sure. I mean, we've talked such a learning experience with you, but where have you performed? Because as you were talking, I was like, have you performed at Storm King yet? Like I know it's outdoors, but
we haven't performed at Storm King. I'll tell you that. So for the past couple of years, and it's been growing and evolving, I have an ongoing eco artist residency with the New York Society for Ethical Culture, and that has been really an extraordinary home for myself and the company. And it's enabled me also to collaborate on the sort of programming side and the kind of conceptualing side with partners there, so that we've been performing at Ethical Culture, which has a glorious venue on Upper West Side of Manhattan. It's essentially like a humanist congregation, but they have this incredible 800-seat auditorium that has been like our rehearsal and performance home. But we also have spiraled out, and we have done a performance within that neighborhood. There's a lot of public housing projects, and we've done a performance bringing the arbor and plastic harvest to the Amsterdam houses, which is neighborhood, and it's part of the effort. In New York we have this like very segregated neighborhoods, where you have people who are extremely privileged, living like, on the other side of an avenue from people who are, have a lot of disadvantages. So, right. It's like we've been bringing it to places where everybody has a chance to be part of it. And so that's also been really meaningful, is looking to kind of address the inequities in the fabric of our city, the racial and the socioeconomic inequities. And as we advocate for looking at public space in, greener ways. Oh,
wow. So if we can't catch one of your performances, where do we get to catch it on? Through a screen? I know it's the same, but
no. Well, the first place I was going to say is, we have at timelapsedance.com a lot of information about the program. So the first page to look is the events page, and we'll post events there. And we also have links to our YouTube channel and information about each of our projects and site activations. And depending on where you live, if you want us to come and visit your town, shoot us an email, let us know if you think there's a good venue. We'd be happy. We do travel, and we travel in different ways, either, for a theatrical performance and or for, the site work. And we do, especially during the pandemic, we did produce a few dance films, and those are available at this point. They've done the kind of little mini festival circuit, and they're available on YouTube. But also Time-Lapse Dance is featured in another documentary, which we can talk about at a later time, called Obsessed with Light, which is currently making the festival circuit, and hopefully we'll have a theatrical release in the fall. And so I'd be happy to talk more about that another time.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put your website time lapse in the show notes for sure. That will just link right there so everybody can see what we've been talking about and what you're up to and how they can bring your performance to their town.
Yeah, we have a booking page, so.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we're very, I feel like part of committing to this work is understanding that we have a mission to radiate these impacts. And so I'm a New Yorker. I love, performing here, connecting with communities here, but we just find such joy in connecting with communities in other places, and also talking with people about tying it into the local trees, the local environmental issues. If you're in Virginia, maybe you're talking about sea level rise or solidification of the soil, right? But maybe in the Northwest, really what's concerning is the fires, and so everybody is experiencing their kind of climate trauma, in different ways. And we're all facing it now. We're not all facing it, but we all are confronted with it, whether we, are choosing to kind of process it and move forward in a kind of way or not. And so these performances are just a part of a way also for being able to have conversations and being able to have a kind of positive vision for how we can move forward in a kind of grandly collaborative way so that we can model that better world that we have the power to enact.
Wow, you're such a leader. Thank you for doing that. Yes, because what you're modeling is what I think we need more of in this world to help rebalance the feminine and rebalance our connection with our own body and rebalancing with the earth. I think what you're doing is amazing, and I know others do too.
All right. So, well, thank you very much for this conversation and this opportunity to speak with you today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for vibing with the female frequency today. If this episode or any other episode has helped transform or shift your perspective in any way, please tell me all about it. Tell me all about it in a review where you are listening to this podcast. It will totally help me out and help spread the vibe. If you're a creative looking for more support, this is what I do for a profession. I often host workshops, and you can find out all about those on my website. So take a look at www.pressrein.com. That's PRESSREIGN.com. All right, y'all, until next time.